What if 5 innocent children could vanish without a trace, only to become the center of one of South Korea's most chilling mysteries? Welcome to SherlockMode. March 26, 1991. A public holiday in South Korea. The nation was focused on its first democratic elections in 30 years. But in a quiet village outside Daegu, 5 families were about to face their worst nightmare. The boys were inseparable. Woo Chul-won, 13 years old. Jo Ho-yeon, 12. Kim Yong-gyu, 11. Park Chan-in, 10. And Kim Jong-sik, just 9 years old. They called them the 5 Musketeers. Their houses formed a perfect circle. The children often played together in the paddy field that stretched before their homes. They were closer than brothers, sharing dreams and adventures that only children could imagine. That morning, young Chul-won returned home to fetch a thicker jacket. His father asked where he was going. The boy simply replied he was going out to play. It was 9 in the morning. No one knew it would be the last time they would see him alive. The 5 boys had a plan. They were heading to Mount Waryeong to search for salamander eggs. It was a common springtime activity, an innocent adventure that children in the area had enjoyed for generations. Mount Waryeong held secrets. On the left side stood an army base. To the right, a quiet pond reflected the morning sky. And above the pond, a military shooting range where soldiers practiced their aim. At 1:13 p.m., a phone call shattered the afternoon calm. The Taekwondo Academy was calling. Chul-won had missed his lesson. Soon, the other parents realized their children were missing too. The parents rushed to Mount Waryeong. They searched frantically, calling their children's names until their voices echoed off the mountainside. But there was nothing. No trace. No sign. Only silence. A friend had seen the boys earlier that day. When asked where they were going, the children had replied they were searching for lizard eggs. This was the last confirmed sighting of the 5 friends. Initially, the police showed little interest. South Korea was consumed by election fever. The authorities dismissed the boys as runaways, suggesting they would return home when they got hungry or tired. But these parents knew their children. These were not troublemakers or runaways. They were good boys who always came home on time. Something terrible had happened. Days passed. The story began to capture media attention. A news broadcast described 5 boys still missing after trying to catch frogs. Thus, they became known as the Frog Boys. The case exploded across the nation. President Roh Tae-woo himself ordered a massive search operation. 300,000 police officers and military personnel mobilized. It was one of the largest manhunts in South Korean history. 8 million flyers were distributed nationwide. A reward of 42 million won was offered. The search was broadcast live on television, captivating the entire country. Mount Waryeong was searched over 500 times. Every cave, every valley, every possible hiding place was examined with military precision. Yet nothing was found. Not a single trace. On May 4th, the parents appeared on a television program called The Square of Public Opinions. They pleaded with the nation for help, expressing their frustration with the investigation. Then, during the live broadcast, a phone call came in. A child's voice, crying, asking for his mother. The audience erupted in applause. The boys were alive, but their hope was cruelly shattered. It was a hoax, a cruel prank that devastated the families and the entire nation. But it wasn't the last false lead they would receive. Over 500 fake reports would torment the investigation. The fathers made an extraordinary decision. They quit their jobs, bought a small truck, and began searching the entire country. Photos of their missing sons were pasted on the sides, with a desperate plea. Please help find our missing children. They traveled in all weather conditions, never giving up hope. Rain, snow, scorching heat, nothing stopped them. One father became addicted to sleeping pills, unable to cope with the constant nightmares. But they weren't searching alone. Intelligence agents had begun following them, monitoring their every move. The parents noticed the same suspicious men appearing at every press conference. The agents claimed they were there for the family's protection, but the parents suspected something far more sinister. Why were they being watched instead of the military base that everyone was talking about? Whispers began to circulate. On the day the children disappeared, one of their friends had heard something chilling, a gunshot, followed by a scream, then complete silence. The military shooting range was only 300 meters from where the boys were last seen. Officers were permitted to practice shooting even on holidays. But the police refused to investigate the military connection. Years passed. The media attention faded. The parents, drowning in debt from their nationwide search, were forced to return to work. The case grew cold, but their pain never diminished. Then came a new torment. A criminal psychologist made a shocking accusation. He claimed that one of the fathers had murdered his own son and buried the body under his house. The house was excavated on live television. The nation watched as the father's home was torn apart, his reputation destroyed. Nothing was found. The psychologist fled through the crowds as people called for his arrest. The false accusation killed the father's spirit. He died of liver cancer 5 years later, still in his 40s, never knowing the truth about his son's fate. September 26, 2002. 11 years after the boys vanished. 2 men collecting acorns on Mount Waryong made a grisly discovery among the rocks and undergrowth. They found the skeletal remains of all 5 boys, huddled together in death as they had been in life. The area had been searched countless times before. How had they been missed? The parents rushed to the scene. After 11 years of searching, hoping, praying, their worst fears were confirmed. Their children were dead. But the police's handling of the crime scene was catastrophic. Officers without forensic training trampled evidence, mixed up bones, and contaminated the site for hours before experts arrived. The police chief immediately declared hypothermia as the cause of death. But forensic experts were outraged. If the children had died naturally, their bones would have been scattered by animals, not buried together. The Korea Alpine Federation investigated the scene. Their verdict was unequivocal. This was not hypothermia. The location was barely 100 meters from the nearest road. The children could have walked home in 5 minutes. Then came the smoking gun. Empty bullet cartridges and unused ammunition were found tied inside one of the boys' clothing. The bullets were traced to the military shooting range. Forensic analysis revealed horrific details. 3 of the children's skulls showed signs of blunt force trauma, sharp cuts from metal weapons. 1 child's arm bone was fractured, a defensive wound. Most disturbing of all, 1 child's clothes were found turned inside out, suggesting his eyes had been covered before he was murdered. This was no accident. This was execution. The 50th Infantry Division confirmed that the bullets found with the bodies came from their shooting range, but they denied all involvement, claiming no drills occurred that holiday. However, there was a crucial detail they failed to mention. Commissioned officers were permitted to use the shooting range independently, even on holidays. Someone had been firing weapons that day. A witness later reported that an officer had been seen firing his rifle that day, using up leftover ammunition. The identity of this officer was never revealed. The shooting range was relocated to another town in 1994, just 3 years after the boys' disappearance. Was this coincidence, or was evidence being destroyed? Despite overwhelming evidence pointing to military involvement, the police investigation stalled. No military personnel were ever questioned. No search warrants were issued for the base. The parents filed lawsuits against the police for negligence and evidence tampering. They lost all 3 trials. The system protected itself while 5 murdered children remained without justice. 2 years after finding their children's remains, the parents finally held a funeral. The boys were cremated together, their ashes scattered in the Nakdong River to flow into the Pacific Ocean. The father who had been falsely accused never lived to see his son's remains found. He died believing the world thought him a child killer, his reputation destroyed by lies. In 2015, South Korea abolished the statute of limitations for murder. The change was largely due to cases like the Frog Boys, where justice had been denied for too long. Today, the case remains officially unsolved. No one has ever been arrested. The military's role was never investigated. 5 children's murders remain unpunished. But there's another tragic connection to this case. Actor Woo Young-taek, who appeared in the Netflix series Squid Game, is the older brother of victim Woo Chol-won. The surviving parents, now in their 70s, continue to demand answers. They vow to search for the truth until their dying breath. Let us analyze the evidence like Sherlock Holmes himself would approach this mystery. First, the timeline. 5 boys disappear on a military holiday. A gunshot and scream are heard. Military bullets later found with their bodies. The pattern is clear. Second, the location. The children were found within the effective range of military weapons. The shooting range was mysteriously relocated after their disappearance. Third, the evidence tampering. Crime scene contamination. Immediate declaration of natural causes. Refusal to investigate military connections. Classic signs of institutional cover-up. Fourth, the forensic evidence. Bullet casings inside clothing. Blunt force trauma to skulls. Bodies deliberately buried. This was planned murder, not accidental death. Fifth, the witness testimony. Intelligence agents monitoring families. Blocked military investigations. Official denials contradicted by physical evidence. The truth was suppressed. The most likely scenario: military personnel accidentally shot one or more children during unauthorized weapons practice. To cover up the accident, all witnesses were eliminated. The children were then murdered to prevent them from reporting the shooting. Their bodies were buried to hide the evidence. It was a cover-up that went all the way to the top. Why were intelligence agents monitoring the families? Because they feared the parents might uncover evidence linking the military to their children's deaths. Why was the shooting range relocated? To destroy physical evidence and remove the crime scene from public access and investigation. Why did police contaminate the crime scene? Either through incompetence or deliberate evidence destruction to protect military interests over justice for the victims. The Frog Boys case represents more than just 5 murdered children. It exposes how institutional power can crush individual families seeking truth and justice. In authoritarian South Korea of 1991, military interests took precedence over civilian lives. 5 children were sacrificed to protect institutional reputation. The case changed South Korean society. It led to legal reforms, improved missing person protocols, and eventually the removal of murder statute of limitations. But for the families, no legal reform can bring back their children or heal decades of unanswered questions and suppressed truth. The military connection remains the most logical explanation. Accidental shooting, followed by deliberate cover-up murder, protected by institutional conspiracy. 5 innocent children went looking for salamander eggs and encountered something that powerful people wanted hidden forever. Their voices were silenced, but their story endures. The Frog Boys of South Korea. 5 names that will never be forgotten. Woo Chul-won, Jo Ho-yeon, Kim Yong-gyu, Park Chan-in, Kim Jong-sik. May they finally rest in peace. Their story reminds us that truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried by those who seek to hide it. Justice may be delayed, but it cannot be denied forever. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, like and subscribe to Sherlock Mode.